I haven't given out yet, if you haven't. So I'd like to congratulate all the 5-year birthdays. You know, that's really neat that we have 3 in here. 5 is a hard one to get. But I give you a little warning. It may not be in the form of a warning either, but a little information. And I've read that years 6, 7, and 8 are the highest risk years in long-term sobriety. So, you know, it's not time to rest on your laurels. It's because you'll learn a lot. You'll experience a lot in the next 3 years, and you'll learn a lot if you stay active in the fellowship and keep the program in action in your life. The first 5 years of sobriety are fun if you enjoy pain. But also fun if you like to learn. But the quality of the learning increases from year 5, and the intensity of the pain lessens. Anyway, that's been my experience and the experience of others. I'd like to apologize for my dress tonight. I usually like to go about looking rather frumpish. And several people have commented on, you look so, they couldn't, casual was one person used the word casual. And I look a little more modern than I like to look. I don't know why I like to look frumpish, but I do. Yeah. I grew up out in central Missouri, and out there in the 1940s and the 1950s, we were still fighting the Civil War. And I learned at a very early age to spit when I saw a license plate that had Kansas on it. And I learned to despise the state of Kansas, and more specifically the city of Lawrence, and most specifically the University of Kansas. I have the misfortune of having some in-laws that live in Indiana. Indiana is second on my despise list behind Kansas. I hate the state of Indiana, more specifically the city of Indianapolis, and most specifically Butler University, because from there came my main competition for the woman that I chose to use to break up my first marriage. If you understand any of that, you might want to seek therapy. I'm going to take on a job here that I think I can do. We'll see. I'm going to cover step 8 and 9 tonight in one session. I may take the whole time, maybe not. I'm going to try and be brief and say the important things and leave out some of the chaff, maybe. Let's turn to page 77 in the 12 and 12. As we made a list of persons, of all persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9 is one of the easiest steps there is to work. If you have done the work up until step 8, and you have the knowledge to work step 8. Step 8, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the more complex steps, and certainly one of the most difficult. It's the one I had the most trouble with, that blocked me the longest in my road to what became my recovery. It took me a long time. It probably took me 4 or 5 years before I found some keys in step 8 that I could use to make myself comfortable in steps 9, 10, 11, and 12. You I could get pretty comfortable with the mechanical things and the intellectual decisions that I was making up to step 8, but there were some hurdles there that I couldn't even identify, much less get over. And I'm going to share with you tonight what they are, and they may not apply to you, but they did apply to me. Making a list is a mechanical exercise. That list comes principally from the 4th step, maybe not entirely, but principally. And that's the easy part. But how do I become willing? That's the hard part. How do I become willing? Not only willing, not only being able to suck up the courage to do it, but to do it in comfort to myself. It says steps 8 and 9 are concerned with personal relationships. First, we take a look backward and try to discover where we have been at fault. Next, we make a vigorous attempt to repair the damage we have done. And third, having thus cleaned away the debris of the past, we consider how, with our newfound knowledge of ourselves, we may develop the best possible relations with every human being we know. And that says the best possible relation. It doesn't say the perfect relationship with everybody I know. I have the best possible relationships in my life, but they're not perfect. There are people that I have a relationship with today that really don't want to see me or hear from me. But my relationship with them today is that I don't have to avoid them. I don't have to live in fear of seeing them. I don't have to live in fear of being seen by them. So the best possible relation with every human being, whatever that may be. This is a very large order. It is a task which we may perform with increasing skill, but never really finish. And this thing about human relations is a job that's never done. Even in those relationships where I may still be despised and loathed, my job isn't done. As long as these people are in my life on some basis, I'm detached from many of those people, and I never see them or hear from them. They don't know where I am, and I don't know where they are, and we're not searching each other out. But the people that are still in my life, it's an ongoing process to improve this relationship, to make it as best as I can. Learning how to live in the greatest peace, partnership, and brotherhood with all men and women of whatever description is a moving and fascinating adventure. Moving and fascinating adventure it is if I'm out of my self-centeredness. I want to refer back, and you don't need to, but I want to, because this is also concerned with step 8 and 9, but you remember we talked early about Bill's statement on page 14 in his story in the big book. It says that it's simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. He's telling us here on page 14 what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous accomplishes. I had to pay the price to destroy my self-centeredness. And then on page 20, he says that my very life, he tells me how I go about destroying self-centeredness. He says, my very life as an ex-problem drinker depends upon my constant thought of others and how I may help meet their needs. And we talked about what another person's human or needs are. And the only emotional need another human being has is that they need to feel good about themselves. And what role am I playing in another person's life about how they feel about themselves? Am I doing all I can to help them feel good about themselves? Or am I intentionally trying to make them feel bad or angry or provoke some kind of negative emotion in them? And that's what I have to be constantly on guard about. is helping other people feel good about themselves. Every AA has found that he can make little headway in this new adventure of living until he first backtracks and really makes an accurate and unsparing survey of the human wreckage he has left in his wake. To a degree, he has already done this when taking moral inventory, but now the time has come when he ought to redouble his efforts to see how many people he has hurt and in what ways. This reopening of emotional wounds, some old, some perhaps forgotten, and some still painfully festering, will at first look like a purposeless and pointless piece of surgery. And certainly when I first got sober and I looked at this and I said, good Lord, what do I want to put a stick of dynamite in a hornet's nest for? You know, because I thought, if I go back and do all this, you know, no good can come of it. So it looked pointless to me. Not only pointless, but it looked destructive. But I came to the understanding of what I was trying to do, what I was being asked to do. But if a willing start is made, then the greatest advantage of doing this will so quickly reveal themselves that the pain will be lessened as one obstacle after another melts away. These obstacles, however, are very real. The first and one of the most difficult has to do with forgiveness. And there's that word. That word that I don't have any understanding of. If I come to hate you, it's for life. If you do me wrong, I never forget. I know I only won't forget, but I'll probably try to get even if I can get my hands on you, either figuratively or literally. The moment we ponder a twisted or broken relationship with another person, our emotions go on the defensive. I never did anything wrong. I wouldn't have acted that way if they hadn't done, if they hadn't said, if she hadn't, if they hadn't, if it hadn't. To escape looking at the wrongs we have done another, we resentfully focus on the wrongs he has done us. This is especially true if he has, in fact, behaved badly at all. And there were a lot of instances in my life where there was bad behavior on the other person's part. But what did I do? You know, that's what I've got to look at. There are a lot of instances where I was wrong. But what did it do to me? What did it cause me to do? Because I was operating in this self-will run riot, and I wasn't thinking about another person's needs and how I could help them meet them. Triumphantly, we seize upon his misbehavior as the perfect excuse for minimizing or forgetting our own. Right here, we need to fetch ourselves up sharply. It doesn't make much sense when a real tosspot calls us kettle black. Let's remember that alcoholics are not the only ones bedeviled by sick emotions. And you remember the prayer back in the fourth step. You know, perhaps all people are spiritually sick, and it tells us what to do about that. Moreover, it is usually a fact that our behavior when drinking has aggravated the defects of others. We've repeatedly strained the patience of our best friends to a snapping point and have brought out the very worst in those who didn't think much of us to begin with. In many instances, we are really dealing with fellow sufferers, people whose woes we have increased. If we are about to ask forgiveness for ourselves, why shouldn't we start out by forgiving them one and all? Because I don't know how yet. When listening to people we have harmed, most of us hit another solid obstacle. We get a pretty severe shock when we realize that we were preparing to make a face-to-face admission of our wretched conduct to those we had hurt. It had been embarrassing enough when in confidence we had admitted these things to God, to ourselves, to another human being. But the prospect of actually visiting or even writing the people concerned now overwhelmed us, especially when we remembered in what poor favor we stood with most of them. There were cases, too, where we had damaged others who were still happily unaware of being hurt. Why, we cried, shouldn't bygones be bygones? Why do we have to think of all these people at all? These were some of the ways in which Fear conspired with pride to hinder our making a list of all the people we had harmed. Fear conspired with pride. One justified the other. I'm afraid to do this. I don't have to do this. I'm not required to do this. Whichever one would take the heat off of me, I used. Either fear or the pride. Some of us, though, tripped over a very different snag. We clung to the claim that when drinking, we never hurt anybody but ourselves. Our families didn't suffer because we always paid the bills and seldom drank at home. Our business associates didn't suffer because we were usually on the job. Our reputations haven't suffered because we were certain few knew of our drinking. None of those apply to me, unfortunately. Those who did would sometimes assure us that after all, the lively bender was only a good man's fault. What real harm, therefore, had we done? No more surely than we could easily mend with a few casual apologies. This attitude, of course, is the end result of purposeful forgetting. It is an attitude which can only be changed by a deep and honest search of our motives and actions. So here is a hint that I'm going to have to undergo another attitude change in order to get this thing done. I have to take a look at my real motives and my real actions, not the fancied ones. I've got to get into reality on this thing, and the reality will change my attitude. Though in some cases we cannot make restitution at all, and in some cases action ought to be deferred, we should nevertheless make an accurate and really exhaustive survey of our past life as it has affected other people. And I usually tell the people that I sponsor, because I was told in general this very thing, to make 4 lists. First list is the amends that will be relatively easy to make, relatively painless to make. Second list are the difficult amends. The third list are the amends that I'll never make. And the fourth one is fuck them.
I like the fourth one.
And what the process does, when I can separate all this out in black and white on paper, it kind of takes the heat off of me, because I have received permission to acknowledge that some of this isn't going to be real easy, and some of it I just absolutely do not want to do. But when I start working on those that are relatively easy to make, and I get a little experience, and I get this attitude change, and I do some other things that we're going to start talking about here in a minute, then those other ones on the lower list down there start to creep up. And as long as I am willing, God will present me with the circumstances where my attitude will be proper, the time will be right, and I will be able to make the amends. I do not encourage people to run around making random apologies to whoever they can track down. That is not very satisfying generally, either to the person to whom the amends are being made, or to the person that's making the amends. I'm talking about where there's some fractured personal relationships. In other instances, you need to run around like a man or a woman possessed, making these amends to get the law off of you or something, and we'll talk about that. But I have never gone out of my way to make an amend. I have never forced the situation, because it's been my experience that if I do so, then I don't have any concern or any recognition of what the other person's emotional state or attitude might be at that time. If I force myself on somebody, it may produce bad results. I've always got to think that there's two people involved in this event. And in order for it to be productive to both people, then everybody has to be in the right emotional state, and the circumstances have to be correct. Not correct, but conducive to making this thing. But it says, in many instances, we shall find that though the harm done others has not been great, the emotional harm we have done ourselves has. And I'm just not that powerful that I wrecked anybody's life. I was an unpleasant circumstance in a lot of people's lives, but I just really didn't wreck anybody's life. I might have upset their peace of mind. I might have made them change directions from the direction that they would have liked to have gone at that moment. But once I got out of the way, they went right back to where they were going anyway. I'm just not that powerful that I can divert the river from its bed. You know, people will go where they're supposed to go. But it says, I haven't hurt anybody very badly. I certainly have hurt myself. It says the other people, the harm done others has not been great. The emotional harm we have done ourselves has. It says very deep, sometimes quite forgotten, damaging. Emotional conflicts persist below the level of consciousness. At the time of these occurrences, they may actually have given our emotions violent twists, which have since discolored our personality and altered our lives for the worse. And what was blocking me in step 8? And I was thinking the other day, when we were talking about the resentment list and the fear list, and I don't know why I forgot this. I spent 3 weeks on the 4th step, but I did. I believe that the first 2 resentments that should be on my 4th step is me and God. I resent myself deeply to the very core of my being. Because as much as I would like to blame other people, I realized somewhere way deep down that I was responsible for everything that was going on. And I didn't understand why I was doing it. The resentment was painful. But nowhere in the first 9 steps of the program of alcoholics in any conference-approved literature does it suggest, indicate, direct, say that I should ask God to forgive me for how I had behaved. It ain't in there. I've looked and I've looked and I've looked and I've looked, and it's not in there. So I have come to the conclusion, which I have confirmed through talking with older members, that God didn't blame me. God made me an alcoholic. He gave me a psychopathic personality. He gave me whatever I was, am, and will become for his own purposes and through his own devices. Now, if God blamed me for my behavior, for doing what I was supposed to be doing with what he gave me, that would make God an asshole. And I have accumulated enough evidence in recent years that that description just doesn't apply to God. But here I am blaming myself. I know better than God. And I resent myself. And I blame me. If I don't forgive myself, then I know better than God. And it tells me in this book that if I'm more powerful than God, that if I know more than God, I will be shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit. I do not have the capacity to contain two gods. And when I got sober down here at 334 a number of years ago, I was sitting right there where Maury was, and a man that I absolutely hated that had been sober about 12 years pointed at me across the table and he said, the only thing you need to know about God is that you ain't him. And I never forgot him telling me that. But I never understood how I was playing God. When I was able to forgive myself for acting like an alcoholic, I was able to see myself in a different light. I was able to feel differently about myself. When I felt like a worthy human being as a result of forgiving myself and stopped playing God, I was able to go to other people with my head up and look them in the eye and apologize. Not until. You can see that this is kind of close to my heart. I like to talk about this because this is what made the program of Alcoholics Anonymous real to me. Because it gave to me peace. I could forgive myself. I'm okay now. While the purpose of making restitutions to others is paramount, it is equally necessary that we extricate from an examination of our personal relations every bit of information about ourselves and our fundamental difficulties that we can. Since defective relations with other human beings have nearly always been the immediate cause of our woes, including our alcoholism, no field of investigation could yield more satisfying and valuable rewards than this one. Calm, thoughtful reflection upon personal relations can deepen our insight. We can go far beyond those things which were superficially wrong with us, to see those flaws which were basic flaws, which sometimes were responsible for the whole pattern of our lives. Thoroughness, we have found, will pay, and pay handsomely. We might next ask ourselves what we mean when we say that we have harmed other people. What kind of harm do people do one another anyway? To define the word harm in a practical way, we may call it the result of instincts in collision. And Bill uses the terms like this throughout the book, misdirected instincts and collision, which cause physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual damage to people. Physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual damage. That is what I need to look for when I'm deciding who I have harmed. If our tempers are consistently bad, we arouse anger in others. If we lie or cheat, we deprive others not only of their worldly goods, but of their emotional security and peace of mind. We really issue them an invitation to become contemptuous and vengeful. If our sex conduct is selfish, we may excite jealousy, misery, and a strong desire to retaliate in kind. Such gross misbehavior is not by any means a full catalog of the harms we do. Let us think of some of the subtler ones which can sometimes be quite as damaging. Suppose that in our family lives we happen to be miserly, irresponsible, callous, or cold. Suppose that we are irritable, critical, impatient, and humorless. Suppose we lavish attention on one member of the family and neglect the others. What happens when we try to dominate the whole family, either by a rule of iron or by a constant outpouring of minute directions for just how their lives should be lived from hour to hour? What happens when we wallow in depression, self-pity oozing from every pore, and inflict that upon those about us? Such a roster of harms done to others, the kind that make daily living with us as practicing alcoholics difficult and often unbearable, could be extended almost indefinitely. When we take such personality traits as these into shop, office, and society of our fellows, they can do damage almost as extensive as that we have caused at home. Having carefully surveyed this whole area of human relations, and having decided exactly what personality traits in us injured and disturbed others, we can now commence to ransack memory for the people to whom we have given offense. To put a finger on the nearby and most deeply damaged ones shouldn't be too hard to do. Then as year by year we walk back through our lives as far as memory will reach, we shall be bound to construct a long list of people who have, to some extent or other, been affected. We should, of course, ponder and weigh each instance carefully. We shall want to hold ourselves to the course of admitting the things we have done while forgiving the wrongs done others, real or fancy. We should avoid extreme judgments, both of ourselves and of others involved. We must not exaggerate our defects or theirs. A quiet, objective view will be our steadfast aim. Whenever our pencil falters, we can fortify and cheer ourselves by remembering what AA experience in this step has meant to others. It is the beginning of the end of isolation from our fellows and from God. So it's step 8. The key for me is forgiveness of self. Then my life becomes infinitely possible. Let's go to page 76 in the big book. The third paragraph there on page 76. Now, we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at step 8 and 9. The instructions here in Alcoholics Anonymous, step 8 and 9, aren't separated. I think the instructions on page 8 in the 12 and 12 are fairly good. The instructions on step 9 in the big book are fairly good. I don't see any instructions on step 8 in the big book, and I don't think what's in the 12 and 12 on step 9 is particularly strong. So I'm not going to read step 9 in the 12th tonight. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't. But just for the sake of brevity, I'm going to skip that. There are some good things in there, but it's not packed full of meat as far as that I found necessary to use anyway. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all people we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory, and I said that this list should come from primarily or principally from the 4th step. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any length for a victory over alcohol. I even had to go to the absurd length of having to forgive myself. But it says here that I need to pray for the willingness, and that's part of it too. I certainly had to pray for the willingness to forgive myself and for the strength to forgive others. Probably there are still some misgivings. As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel definite about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Definite meaning reluctant. Let us be reassured. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. So these are the instructions about what we do when we're going out. We might prejudice them. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order. But this is not an end in itself. And here it is again, what we read just a minute ago back on page 14 and page 20. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and to the people about us. I have to fit myself by ending this isolation in step 8. This isolation that I've had from God and my fellow man. I have to end that and start to take responsibility for other people's well-being. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message, but our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than our talk of spiritual discoveries. You know, talk's cheap. What are you doing? You know, I've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. Well, why are you acting like you ain't? We don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we are willing to announce our conviction with tact and common sense. The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. It may be he has done us more harm than we have done him, and though we have acquired a better attitude toward him, we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. The more difficulty a man, the more it benefits me. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply, we tell him that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so, never trying to tell him what he should do. What he does, should do, isn't any of our business. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. if our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we are calling upon admits his own fault, so feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally, they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. So it's not important that anybody accepts the amends that I try to make. It's not important that anybody forgives me. What is important is that I try to make the best amends possible under the best circumstances possible with the right attitude. Most alcoholics owe money. I didn't know that one. We do not dodge our creditors, telling them what we are trying to do. We make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them. You know, and credit is the easiest thing in the world to manage. It doesn't make any difference whether you can pay the bills or not. You still have to manage your credit. You know, what makes creditors nervous is when they can't get in touch with you, when they write you letters and you never reply to them, when they call you on the phone and you never return the phone call. That makes people nervous. But if I know today, thinking clearly and being in reality, if I know I'm not going to be able to meet a financial obligation, and that happens from time to time, I'll call them. And I'll say, I'm not going to be able to pay you. And they say, okay. When can you pay us? I don't know. I'll call you on the 15th of June. I think I'll know by then. Okay, we'll make a note. If we don't hear from you, we'll give you a call. Just please do. Sometimes I might forget, so please call me. Anybody know this Midwest collection group up here? I was on a first name basis with everybody that worked there. They call me. I'd thank them for calling. Can you pay anything? No. Well, when do you think? I don't know. It's bad. So, well, can I call you? Oh, please call me. I don't want to forget this. Well, I got them paid off. Hell, they got tired of talking to me. I still owe them probably $500 on a hospital bill from when I was drunk. They just wrote it off. They got tired of the sound of my voice, I guess. Hell, I went by there and I said, why haven't you been calling me? Gave him $50. If you act like you want to pay the bill, creditors don't get nervous. Man, I used to play with them. I owed American Express $5,000 once. It's when I used to like to go to Los Angeles for lunch. They turned me over to a collection agency. And the guy called me. He said, "You haven't been responding to my letters." I said, "No." Telling him something he didn't already know. Stage 2 says you have, unless you can pay right now. I said, "Well, I don't know what stage 2 is, but I don't want to go through hell now." So I tell you what I'll do. I don't want this to go on. Where are you located? He was at 720 Olive in the complete gas building. And I said, "I tell you what I'm going to do." I said, "I can't pay the whole $5,000, but I think I can pay $2,500. I'm going to call county cab, and I'm going to give him, the cab driver, a check. And when he leaves here with the check, I'm going to call you and give you the cab number, and you go downstairs and wait outside on the sidewalk until that cab shows up." He called me back. He says, "Where in the hell's that cab?" I said, "Isn't it there yet? Let me call the cab company." Well, he finally caught on. That makes creditors nervous. That's very good. I finally got American Express paid off. And I'll be damned. 7 years almost to the day, and I don't know exactly what it was, 7 years almost to the day after I had paid them off, they sent me a gold card with an unlimited credit line. I could buy Moscow tomorrow on my American Express gold card. I wanted to write the president of the company and tell him he was a fool. I guess he heard I sobered up. I don't know. You know what I said? But these things have to be taken care of, or they just eat us up. It says we have to lose our fear of creditors, or we might drink. We're afraid to face them. You know, when I sobered up, I hadn't filed federal income tax returns for 6 years. And I've been self-employed in one form or another. A lot of people think I've never been employed, but in one form or another for 20 years. And I've made a little bit of money, and I've lost a hell of a lot, let me tell you. But I hadn't filed any income tax returns for 6 years, and boy, it was just eating me alive. And I don't know. I had a license to practice as a certified public accountant, and I was reading in the Wall Street Journal about what they were doing to CPAs and tax attorneys, you know, that were pulling shenanigans, and the federal courts were holding the supposed experts to a little higher standard than they were Joe Blow out on the street, you know, the barber and those kinds of people. And I thought, God almighty, I can't get this straightened out. Well, here I was 3 years sober, and now I hadn't filed my federal income tax returns for 9 years. So and all this time I felt like I had a big black rat in my guts trying to eat his way out. And I couldn't get rid of it any other way than facing the problem. You know? And I finally had to find a way to face the problem. You know? And how I faced the problem was by following the instructions in Step 8 and Step 9. I thought sure I was going to go to the federal penitentiary. You know, but being a typical alcoholic, it took a little shenanigans to get out of it. You know. But once I went to work on it, once I was willing to face it, once I was willing to do a little bit, then my fear started to go away, and I was able to take responsibility for my actions and face the consequences. And the consequences were never as large as I expected them to be, and they certainly weren't as large as they should have been. But it almost got me drunk. It took me almost 9 months to get the mess straightened out once I started to work on it. And I didn't know how it was going to turn out until I got finished with it. But it turned out all right. Perhaps we have committed a criminal offense which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried. They haven't kept up the alimony to number one. I only owe my first wife about $75,000. She's forgiven me, though. She is indignant about it and has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble, too. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. Also, I didn't get sober to get stupid either. I'm not going to throw myself in a den of lions for the sake of throwing myself in a den of lions just because I can't forgive myself for what I've done. Because there's other people involved in my life that will suffer whatever consequences that I suffer as a result of making these amends. So they have to be well thought out, and they have to be thoroughly discussed with another human being. And counsel has to be sought, whether it be professional or from a sponsor, so that I can make a rational decision about how to go about making the amends, so that I don't end up in some trouble that will cause other people trouble, if it can be avoided. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life, had secured a position, and was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, but if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course, she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. Before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, ask God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money. And that just gives a little personal story there. So let's go down to the bottom of page 80. You can go back and read that if you have a need to. The chances are that we have domestic troubles. Perhaps we are mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt if, in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. But drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic, a wife gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what happened to mine. How could she be anything else? I had to come to realize that. She became what she was supposed to become. The husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. He commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. Perhaps he is having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand, but what are we going to do about a thing like that? A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he is married to a loyal and courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. And that's written in the masculine gender, so, but I don't want you ladies to think you're excluded. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She will want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. We are sorry for what we have done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. More than that we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we have often found this the best course to take. Our design for living is not a one-way street. It is as good for the wife as for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. But that has to be her or his decision, not something that I impose upon. It is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk a face-to-face combat. If we have no such complication, there's plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is to keep sober. Certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wives or parents whom for years he has so shockingly treated. Passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives that have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today, would perhaps be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. Well, physical sobriety is a fact. Emotional sobriety is a state of mind. You know, either I'm drinking or I'm not drinking. But what's going on in my head? And that's what Bill's talking about here. He is like the farmer who came up out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand that the wind stopped blowing?" You know. And that's the way that's the way I thought, well, I'm not drinking anymore. Who cares if the house is wrecked? At least I'm sober, right? Everything okay? The wind stopped blowing. No, you're still up. Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. Yeah. A long period of reconstruction ahead. This wife that I said became worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative, that I had to make a decision whether I was going to stay with or not when I got sober because I thought she was wrecked beyond repair. I had to make a decision that there was a long period of reconstruction ahead. And me getting sober just didn't change the past. It still happened. I had to make a decision how I was going to live my life. Whether I was going to take responsibility for what I did and stay in the consequences and try to reconstruct it. Or was I going to go out and find me another woman to ruin? Or help this one get a little better after I had ruined her. It says, we must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, and they are, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible, and mine were. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. Patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. I care about you. You're important. Your well-being comes before mine. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our behavior will convince them more than our words. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. You know, there's some things wrong in my relationship with my wife that will never be the way that it was or could have been. Some things are lost and gone forever. There may be some things we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. There may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. And how can I stand on my feet if I am ashamed of myself for what I have done? For what God never blamed me for? As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. I am entitled to be treated as a human being. I am not entitled to take other people's rights away from them. But I'm entitled to be treated as a human being, and I am entitled to point out to other people when I am not being so treated in a loving way. Let's read the last paragraph in step 9 on, where is it? Over here. Page 87. The last sentence. It says, for the readiness to take the full consequences of our past acts and to take responsibility for the well-being of others at the same time, is the very spirit of step 9. I'm responsible for what I've done and for how you feel about yourself, based upon what my behavior is today. And it says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. And here are the promises. If you don't know where the promises are in the big book, here they are at the end of step 9. I looked and looked and looked and looked for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 12 promises. And they say, dumb shit, they're not in the right way. Here they are. And then I looked at them. I said, hell, there aren't 12 promises in there. There are 11. Well, yeah, we know, but we took an and out and put a period in sometime, made them 12, because Bill thought 12 was a mystical number. He liked things in 12s. So here they are. Before we are halfway through, we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity. We will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize. They will always materialize if we work for them. Thanks for listening.